guys, my name is Micah and today I'll be teaching you how to use the Multiband Dynamics audio effect in Ableton Live. So first up, I've got the sample, and if I go into my browser, open this little triangle under audio effects, you can get your Multiband Dynamics. You can scroll or you can just use this search bar if you just know what it's called. Then I'm going to pull it in and then you get this Multiband Dynamics audio effect. So this device is a flexible tool for modifying the dynamic range of audio material. This Multiband Dynamics audio effect allows for upward and downward compression as well as upward and downward expansion of up to 3 independent frequency bands with adjustable crossover points and envelope controls for each band. So if that sounded a bit jargony to you, don't worry, I'll explain all of that in layman's terms. Each of these 3 frequency ranges has both an upper and a lower threshold, which will allow you to do 2 types of dynamics processing simultaneously on one band, which means you can do upward, say, expansion as well as downward compression on the same frequency band. Okay, so let's repeat that in layman's terms. I have an audio sample over here, and when it goes through Multiband Dynamics, I can do the following things. First of all, I can split up this sample into 3 specific frequency bands. So I can decide what my high frequency bands are going to be, what my mid frequency bands are going to be, and what my low frequency bands are going to be. And I do that on the left here with the high, mid, and low. And underneath all of these buttons, you can decide what your frequency cutoff points are. So I'll explain the buttons shortly, but basically you've got your 3 frequency bands, which you can see here in kind of rows. So you've got your high frequency band with its input, this is your lower threshold, this is your upper threshold, and then you've got this frequency band's output, and then this over here is, I guess, kind of like the master track of this audio effect. So all of the frequency bands go into this guy over here and then out. And what you can do with these frequency bands, you can treat them individually. So instead of compressing this whole sample or expanding this whole sample, and I'll tell you what both of these things are shortly, you can decide, I only want to compress the top frequencies, or I want to expand the lower frequencies. So it gives you a lot more control over which frequencies are being squashed and pushed up than in a normal compressor. Right, compression, what is that? So if you don't know what compression is, please have a look at this video where I explain how to use the compressor in Ableton Live. But basically, a compressor decreases the dynamic range of a signal, which means the difference between the loudest point and the softest point in the signal is going to be less than it was before it went through the compressor. So you can either compress something by pushing the lowest levels up, so making the softest parts louder, or you can compress something by pushing the loudest parts down and making them softer. And these 2 types of compression are either called upward compression if you push the lowest level up, or downward compression if you clamp down on the highest signals. And now, what is expansion? So expansion is kind of the opposite of that. So given a threshold, and this threshold is the signal level that either after which or before which you want some kind of action to be taken. So at a given point, say for instance the signal reaches this peak, you actually now want to make the peak louder. You don't want to compress it like what a compressor usually would do. Then above this threshold, you can push that level up, and what you're doing is you're expanding the dynamic range. You're increasing the distance between the lowest point and the highest point, so to speak. You can also do that downwards, so you can take the softest point, and if that's softer than a specific amount, so for instance, if it's lower than a threshold, you can say, you know what, I want it to be even softer, and that's downward expansion. Whoa, I hit my table there because I was explaining so vigorously with my hands. Right, now, I hope you're still with me. I hope you now understand what compression is, what expansion is, and how this plugin takes your audio and splits it into 3 different frequency bands. If we're on the same page now, we can continue. If not, maybe listen to the explanation again. You can click on the timestamp from the description or ask me in the comments and I'd be happy to explain it further. But now that the theory is out of the way, I'm going to go into this audio effect and explain how this particular Multiband Dynamics processor works. So like I alluded to earlier, you've got your 3 frequency bands that are kind of visually depicted in this kind of row, this row, and this row. You've also got your soft knee, so you can decide whether or not you want a knee which means compression or expansion happens gradually as opposed to specifically at a point. You can decide between peak and RMS. Then you've got your graphical display over here, which I'm going to explain to you guys soon. It might seem a bit weird at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really easy to use and really intuitive, so bear with me. Then at the bottom over here, you've got T, B, and A. T stands for time here, and you've got all your attack and release values. B over here is below, and you set all your below thresholds, again for your high, your mid, and your low frequency band. And underneath your threshold, so your dB value over here, you've got your ratio, and this determines how strong your compression or expansion is going to be. And then the A stands for above, so this sets your above threshold and your above ratios. And you've got your 3 output levels. It's kind of like your makeup gain. And then over here, you can change the whole output of all of the frequencies put together. So this isn't frequency specific. You've got your time control, which is related to your attack and release values, and then your amount, which is kind of like your dry wet knob. And then if you go to your left, you've got this little triangle, you click it and you can actually sidechain, which means you can apply compression on the signal that you've put this audio effect on based on a different signal. So usually you compress something based on the same signal, i.e. if my voice here is too loud, I want you to clamp down on my voice and make it softer. But by sidechaining, you're saying, given this external audio source, say for instance this kick drum, if this kick drum is too loud, I want you to make my voice softer so that I can hear the kick drum. Jumping into the details. So first of all, on your high and your low, you can click on high and low and activate it or deactivate the frequency band. So you can even see in the graphical display, if I click on high and it goes away, I've only got 2 bands. So essentially my mid, which will be everything above my low, and my low. Similarly with low, if I take it away, I've now only got 1 band, and this is your mid band, but don't be fooled by the terminology. This is actually your whole signal. So if you want to use this as just a compressor and expander and not a multiband dynamics compressor or expander, then just deactivate your high and your low threshold. And if you've just got your high active, then your mids are essentially all your lower frequencies, anything below this point. I mean, even if you have all 3 active, you can decide to bypass certain things. So for instance, I have these 3 bands now, but I don't want any processing to happen on the highs. So I want the highs to stay as they are. So you can just bypass that, but you've still got your 3 bands, which means you can still determine an upper and a lower limit for your mid-range. And then this S button over here is to solo. So this is really useful if you're actually setting your cutoff points and you're not quite sure, maybe 2.26 kilohertz doesn't mean much to you, then you can play the sample, solo just this band, and you can hear these are all the frequencies above 2.26 kilohertz. And kind of above 7 kilohertz, I can only hear the hisses. Maybe that's what you want. In which case your mids are just going to include all of that material below 7.2 kilohertz and above what you've set here. So in this case, 260 kilohertz. Then each of these frequency bands has an input level, and this determines the level of the incoming signal. So it'll take my audio signal over here, and all the frequencies above 7.2 kilohertz, they're either going to be the same level, so 0 dB as it comes in, or you can boost the gain of this frequency band before it gets processed, or even soften it. And on the other side, you've got your output. Again, this is frequency band specific, and it determines the output level of a specific frequency band after it's been processed, so after compression. But this is great because it's kind of like your makeup gain. So if I compress something quite heavily and I want to bring the overall volume of this frequency band back up, then this is the control you'd use to do that. So let's give you a little example. Let's maybe compress this quite heavily. So it's a lot softer now. And then I'm bringing the whole makeup gain up, or the whole output gain up again. Right, I'll get to this little guy just now, what I just did. Might seem a bit strange. Hang in there. Then you've got your soft knee, which toggles your knee on and off, whether you want compression to happen gradually as your threshold is released, or if you want it to not have a knee, so just compress And then RMS over here, you can change between peak and RMS. And in peak mode, your compression or expansion happens based on specific peaks. So if a signal at any given point in time is above or below your threshold, it's going to be acted upon. Whereas RMS takes kind of like an average. So if over a specific amount of time, your peaks have been higher than your threshold, it's going to only then apply compression as opposed to, say, just one random loud peak. Alright guys, let's get to the middle bit. So again, you got your 3 frequency bands. Now, you can choose to compress and expand using these controls on the right here and actually changing your values. So for instance, my threshold I want to be minus 30 dB and I'm going to type it in, and I want my ratio to be 1 to 3. And I want my attack and release to be 5 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds, and I want my above threshold to be minus 20 dB and have a ratio of 1, which doesn't do anything. So you can do that. And if that's your style, by all means, you probably understand how all of this works already, in which case I'm not sure if you can get much more from this tutorial. But if you are curious how to set these thresholds and attack and release times with this graph, then that's what I'll be talking about for the next few minutes. Okay, so let's have a closer look. 3 boxes, 3 frequency bands. Boxes on the left are your below threshold. This line over here, the end of this box will be your low threshold, and the boxes on your right visually depict your above threshold. So this line over here, and as my mouse gets this bracket, this sets my above threshold. So if I click and drag now, you can actually see my above threshold changing. On the right is louder, on the left is softer, kind of like on the piano as well. The right is your higher notes, and the left are your lower notes. Okay, so this is setting your threshold. See my below threshold that I've just changed here? I go click on this B over here, and I can see my below threshold change. Let's have the soloed again, the high frequency, and I'm going to play. This visual display over here, you see an orange line and a little yellow line. That little yellow line at the end is your input level of the signal without any compression happening. It's just the signal as it was, the original signal, whereas the orange line shows your signal level after your compression or expansion. So I'm going to change the controls. I'm going to compress the signal quite a lot so that my orange signal, my after signal, is going to be a lot softer than the incoming one, which is the yellow one, and then you'll be able to see the difference a bit better. Alright, so there you can see it quite nicely, how the signal is being compressed quite a lot compared to the original yellow signal. And of course, if you expand it, so for instance, if I've got a top threshold over here, and I'm saying all the signals after that threshold need to be expanded, then the yellow signal is going to be further down or further to the left than the orange one. So here you can see expanding it. Oh, quick tip, if you want to get the compression ratios back to their default, so 1 to 1, you just double click on there. Just double click over there. Okay, so setting the threshold, quite simple. You do it with this little box over here, your top and your bottom threshold. And now you're saying if a signal is below this threshold, I either want you to make it louder, so that would be upward compression because you're compressing the dynamic range, or I want you to expand the signal. I want you to make it softer because you're expanding the dynamic range. If you want the signal below this threshold to be softer, hover your mouse and get this weird double arrow thing. Click and pull down, pulling down the level. And that way, any signal that is below this threshold is now going to be even softer than it was before. So you can hear it at the end quite well. But if you want the signal beneath this particular threshold to be louder, you need to click and pull up when you've got this double arrow thing. So you can see the color changes, and this kind of orangey color means higher level. Think of it as a hotter signal, and the blue one is cold. So like cold has less energy than heat, so a lower signal, lower energy. So now if you've got a signal that's below this point, you're actually going to push the level up. So it's a lot louder at the end. And similarly with the top, so if you've got your signal that goes above this threshold, you can choose to either raise the level of it or decrease the level of it. And you can use this plugin pretty well just by doing that and completely ignoring these numbers over here and just trusting your ear. But of course, if you don't like this clicking and dragging, then by all means, for your upward level over here, go to A, which means above, and you can set your ratio See how I'm pulling up and down and the color's changing from orange to blue. You're seeing the ratio change at the bottom. And with your below one, you go to B for your below threshold and you pull up and down and you can see your ratio change there. And this works exactly the same for your mid frequency as well as your low frequencies. Now your attack and release, you've got to change over here when you hit time, and this determines how quickly your compressor starts working. So like any of your other attack and release controls in a compressor, so if you wanted to start expanding or compressing pretty much immediately, you've got your 0.1 milliseconds, and if you want the release to be very slow, say 5 seconds, then you can just click and drag it over here. And once you've done all of this, you can change the whole output level. So let me unsolo this. Change the whole output level. When I change the time, I'm changing all of the attack and release values at once by the same amount. So if I've got my 10 millisecond attack and release and all of these other values over here, and I change the time over here to 355%, then I'm increasing all the attack and release times by 355% so that the ratio between all of these attack and release times stay the same, even though the actual values are going to change. And then your amount is literally like your dry wet knob. So at 100%, you want to hear 100% of this kind of compression, expansion, multiband dynamics on your final signal. And at amount 0, you're basically setting all the ratios over here to 1, which means no compression or expansion is happening, which is kind of like bypassing the effect completely. One more thing, guys, sidechaining. So click on this little triangle, and you may recognize this from your other compressor or your other sidechaining features in Ableton, but if you want sidechain enabled, opening this is not enough. You need to also click on sidechain and it goes yellow. Then you can decide where to get your audio input from. Maybe let's get a drum sample quickly. Alright, I want to get my audio from drum, and I've got a drum loop over here. You can decide whether you want it pre, post effects, or post mixer. So this is basically if you want to get the signal right over here before it's gone through any effects, after it's gone through its effects, or only after it's gone through the master fader over here. I'm going to leave it pre-effects right now. They would all do the same anyway, because I don't have any effects on any of these other channels. And then your gain, this sets your input level of the signal. So if you want a lot of this signal going into your sidechain, it's not going to change the volume of anything. It's just going to change how loud the incoming signal is going to be. That's going to determine the compression and expansion amount. And then you've got your dry wet, so how much of this sidechain you want to hear. So I can solo my actual incoming signal for my sidechain, even though I can't really hear it otherwise. And I can then set the threshold, so it's a bit higher. Now let's have a listen. And that's it, guys. That's how to use the multiband dynamics. So it is a lot of information, but once you wrap your head around it, it's really simple to use and intuitive. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I really want you guys to understand this, because using this multiband dynamics audio effect can really change the way you mix and master your tracks, and it can really improve the sound. So get to know this, and if you're still rusty on compressors, check out this video, which was on the iCard earlier, and really understand compression. It's one of the most important audio effects you'll ever need, as well as EQ. And if you're struggling to hear the differences, I've also got a video on EQ3, and a section on it is how to train your ear using EQ3, which is absolutely great if you're new to this and you're training your ear from nothing. So guys, thanks so much for watching. I'm doing a video like this for all of the audio effects in Ableton Live, so if you're interested in this kind of thing and want to learn more, please hit subscribe or let me know, like and comment and share it, because those things are super encouraging for me and they really fuel me to make more of these videos. So thank you so much. Have a great day further, guys and girls, and I will see you soon in the next one.